which are public charitable trusts, and about 14 or 15 different trusts, own 66% of the Tata Sons by way of shareholding. What this means is when the different Tata companies declare dividends, they flow into the Tata Sons by way of shareholding. And when Tata Sons declares those dividends, 66% of those dividends come to the Tata Trust and are used completely for philanthropic purposes. Now, this is a very unique structure in which the business has put forward communities at the very core of doing enterprise. And Jamshedji says that in another one of his very powerful quotes, he says that there exists a kind of philanthropy, and I am not able to word it as well as he does, but he says there exists a kind of philanthropy where you prop up the weakest. And he says that while that is necessary, at no point will you be able to meet the needs of the communities. The best way to do that actually is to enable the strongest members of communities to do good for the rest of the nation. And when we're talking about making businesses responsible, I wanted to pick up on saying what is it that the role of businesses is. One of the other panelists mentioned very rightly that the problem statement in front of us is so large, just in terms of budgetary figures, that even together we are not able to solve this problem, this multifold problem. So what is it that the role that we see for corporates or private philanthropy to play here? And I'm going to rely on an example of a private partnership. This is within the Tata Group, where the Tata Trust has developed a Delta methodology, which is using data. Data stands for data evaluation, learning, technology, and analysis. So they've developed, the Tata Trust has developed a Delta methodology, which basically uses about 150 data points at a household level to conduct almost a census-like survey in any geography that we enter into, while partnering with the government officials and starting at the Gram Panchayat, going up to the block level, and even at the district level, we partner with the government officials to identify what are the challenges that the data shows up. We don't stop there though. We work with the communities, that is the Panchayat and the Gram Sabhas, to identify their priorities, meaning let's say there's only 100 rupees that you can spend, and we talk to the communities and say, you have 100 rupees, these are 5 problems which stand out the most, which one would you prioritize? And this exercise is called a village development plan, and this village development plan is then aggregated from starting at a village, going up to a block and cascading to a district. Now this beautiful methodology of Delta, and in fact my colleagues are referring to the transformation of the aspiration districts program. So the NITI Aayog also refers to it as the Delta rankings because they are based, and the Tata Trust had also consulted and advised the NITI Aayog on formation of these rankings. So the Delta framework helps you make data-driven decisions to allocate funds and solve social problems. How this can be leveraged is, there's an example of what we did with the Tata Steel. Tata Steel, as you may be aware, has set up a very large plant in Kalinganagar, Odisha. And so with Tata Trust, we co-created a program where we said that in the corridor, meaning the highway from Jamshedpur to Kalinganagar, we would enable development through the Delta methodology. We did a survey across 450 villages, across about a population of about 360,000 people, and using the Delta methodology, working with 5 district administrations across 2 states, we identified what are the need areas, and in this unique partnership where we have a charitable trust, we have a corporate CSR, and we have the district administration leveraging government funds to enable change and make impact. I mean, that is the power of partnerships, and if you really ask me, that is the role that corporates should see for themselves, to take risks, develop innovative methodology, and to drive impact. And I mean, just to close my opening remarks, I'm going to say that I believe what Hans Rosling had said, and I urge students in particular to read his book called Factfulness. He says, we are actually living in one of the best times in the history of humanity. Several figures are quoted, not to say at all that we don't have problems, but extreme poverty is half of what it used to be several decades ago. There are more children managing to survive till the age of 5 than ever before in our history. So there's a lot of hope and a lot of positivity. We see negative news because of how human nature is, and Hans Rosling just says that there is enough that can be done and that has been done, which gives us hope that we can take on these challenges.
Thanks, Viraj. Thank you. Thank you all for your opening remarks. Some of the, I mean, while listening, there were some sort of common themes that I was picking up. But before I comment on those, I'd like to clarify that this session is not titled Making Business Responsible, but rather Making Business More Responsible. Not to say that businesses are completely responsible, but there is a lot to hope for, a lot of expectations. To sort of kick off this, the more critical part of this discussion today is that I think in all of the presentations somewhere corporate social responsibility, CSR, came up, and I'll probably touch upon that later. I rather call it CSR, and because I feel that corporate social responsibility is not exactly CSR. CSR, the 2% CSR that one is mandated by law. In the 2018 report by Corporate Responsibility Watch, which is a collective of civil society organizations, they looked at the 200 randomly selected companies from the top 500 BSE listed companies, and they looked at their CSR. So what you get is around 38% of all CSR is in education, 25% in health, and 11% in rural development. It is skewed. It is all towards, I mean, if I place them according to SDGs, you're looking at goal 4, goal 3, and goal 1. None of them look at goal 5, for example, on gender, goal 8 on labor and decent work, goal 10 on inequality, and goal 16 on human rights, access to justice, transparency and accountability, one of the key goals. The other startling fact is that Maharashtra was top ranked as a destination for CSR with more than 2,000 crore. The second state with 840 crore is Karnataka, and Bihar, which was ranked on the 18 as a destination, only received 94 crore. So there's tremendous disparity across the Indian states where CSR funds are expended. To make things more stark, within Maharashtra, 28,000 crore, 28,000 lakhs was spent in Mumbai, and less than a third of it, of 8,000 lakhs was spent in Vidarbha. So yes, CSR is there. If you don't do CSR, it's a legal violation. You have to do it. So people do it, companies do it. But I think Nainish also mentioned that this is about going beyond CSR, CSR plus, and that's why instead of CSR, we calling it responsible business conduct. CSR has often been a kind of a philanthropy, where you look at the 2%, there is the companies are operating in the tribal forested regions of Chhattisgarh, but the CSR is often planting trees in around 2,500 kilometers away from the site of action. It's philanthropy. the idea of responsible business conduct is not to look at simply the 2%, I'm not discounting that, it's important, but remaining 98%. How do businesses operate themselves? So that's my next question to all of you, all my panelists, that beyond CSR, how are companies incorporating the question of responsible business conduct? And by that I mean that not simply in a philanthropical way of, you know, giving funds to either PM relief fund or some other, you know, government mandated philanthropical enterprise, but rather than how are companies looking at improving labor standards, for example, considering this labor conclave. How are they looking at their own labor standards? You know, what are the investments they're making within rather than looking without? Would you like to start, since we began from that side?
Sure. So, frankly, I mean, you're right, and the world we live in today, it no longer can be a differentiation between what is business and what is sustainability, and what you're doing for the community versus what you're doing for profits or for the shareholders.